Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Bookisa Natural Processed Ethiopia from Passenger Coffee Roasters. And there's the bag right there. And Passenger, based out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And for anybody not familiar with Passenger's Freezer Friday coffees, let me go ahead and introduce you to this Bookisa, which was originally harvested back in 2020 and re-released just a couple of months ago as part of Passenger's Freezer Friday series. And when my good buddy Zach found out that they were releasing this coffee, he immediately told me about it, saying it's one of his favorite coffees that he's ever had from them at their cafe. And I will pretty much use any excuse to review one of Passenger's Freezer Friday coffees. So I'm definitely looking forward to discussing this one, as this right here is day 37. And recipe we went with for this coffee was Passenger's recipe, which is a 15.625 to 1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 210 degrees Fahrenheit, about 99 degrees Celsius. And I like this one best through the V60, which indicates a more medium fine grind. Roast profile for this one, Passenger definitely roasts on the lighter side of things relative to a lot of other American coffee roasters, but it's always a little bit more tricky to tell when it comes to natural processed coffees. This one right here, it's definitely not the lightest coffee I've had from Passenger. It falls in line in kind of the middle of the spectrum that they do roast. So I would say pretty much in line with that light medium in terms of that roast profile. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 14, first impression, and ran it through the V60, and it was immediately fresh fruit forward right from the onset, as there were a lot of classical natural Ethiopian characteristics, most distinctly a blueberry forward aspect to the cup, and it was even slightly peachy, as that much fresh fruit typically offers that peachy aspect to the cup as well. A slight bit of chocolate and a vibrant, darker florality to the cup. Pretty nice start overall. We continue on to day 16 as we ran it through the Chemex, and it did feel a little bit more heavy, as it wasn't particularly overwhelming in that sense, but it did offer a lot more of the heavier chocolate aspects and generally a blueberry forward cup. Yet again, more of the dark florality was present yet again, also with a slight bit of a citric lemon to the cup. Day 18 ran it through the April dripper, and the cup feels the most heavy it had been up to this point, as it's not necessarily trending in the best direction, as there's much more of the chocolate components to the cup with the dark floral aspects present yet again, and at this time much more of a fermenty berry as opposed to the fresh berry that I'd experienced earlier. There's a brightness on the back end with a slight bit of a harshness, so I didn't necessarily enjoy it through the April on this day. Day 21 adjusted to Passenger's recipe with the Chemex, and the cup came out surprisingly more clean than expected, especially given the results I had had up to that point with the first impression with the Chemex as well, as there was a little bit more depth to it. Surprisingly high in the floral sense, with a fair bit of a darker floral component, even more noticeable today. Slightly citric as well, as there was definitely an understated brilliance to this day. I couldn't necessarily make out what it was, but this one just seemed to have this kind of weird combination of clarity and dark floral vibrancy to it. Day 25 ran it through the V60 with Passenger's recipe, and it wasn't quite to the same extent as it had been on the previous day that I had brewed it with the V60. It was a little bit more robust in the chocolate profile and complemented by a strong blueberry forward cup. An ever so slight peachy aspect yet again with a lingering chocolate finish. So not necessarily the best day, but these are the couple of days that are going to make me decide on the V60 as opposed to the Chemex, as on day 28 ran it back through the Chemex, and it really wasn't quite as impressive as it had been on that day 21 mark. It was skewing a lot more in terms of that vibrant floral sense yet again, with the chocolate encompassing the entirety of the cup. So this coffee didn't necessarily trend in the best direction after some initially wonderful first impressions, as there was a little bit more faint of a blueberry with a slight graininess to the cup. And I think that's graininess is what kind of sold me on the V60, as I didn't necessarily experience that. It was kind of lacking the same clarity I'd experienced from some earlier days. So on day 31, went back to the V60, settled on it, as there was a slight bit more clarity to the cup on this day. A little bit more of the focus was on the fresh fruit aspects, with plenty of the blueberries present yet again, this time a little bit more well-defined and slightly more clean, with plenty of the chocolate aspect yet again. Darker florals, slight peachiness, much more vibrant cup. The peachiness sold me on this brew method. And on day 34, the best of this coffee comes after letting it cool down to near room temperature as before that. It's skewing a fair bit in the fermenty direction, though still cleaner than the average natural processed coffee. Long-lasting chocolate and berry with the cool down, but it came out a wonderfully mixed berry compote sort of flavor profile to the cup. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have one level 5, a bunch of level 4s. So let's start with that level 5, the finish, level 5. Yes, and it does have a very slight, long-lasting harshness to the cup. It is on the lower side of the level 5. I wouldn't necessarily say it's overbearing, but there is a fair bit of the, well, we'll say long-lasting chocolate aspect to it. In addition to that, a very slight fermenting component to it. I mean, it's a natural processed coffee. That's something you're probably going to be expecting with it. So I was a little surprised, given some really wonderful early impressions of this one, that it did reach that mark. On the earlier days, I could say it was a little bit more in line with that level 4. But I think I do have to say it reached the very low side of that level 5, but still level 5 nonetheless. Sweetness, level 4. Yes, this was a very sweet cup of coffee. At times, I could say that maybe it was on the slightly higher side of that level 4, but honestly, I don't think that that mattered too much when it came to this coffee, as I was kind of expecting a natural processed Ethiopia from Passenger to always go in that direction. Acidity, level 4. Yes, and that's something I haven't mentioned too much, but there was a fair bit of brightness to this cup, which was, I think, maybe a little bit more surprising than I might have expected going into it. Not too much to say on that, honestly. The florality, level 4. Yes, once again, the dark florals, that was one of the most pronounced and consistent characteristics to this coffee. Something that I hadn't mentioned too much. I believe one of the notes they had listed on here was something along the lines of maybe a violet or a jasmine, some sort of darker floral aspect to this one. And I did experience it in significant abundance, so that right there I could see definitely a fair bit of florality within this one. Grapefruit, level 4. Yes, even with some really wonderful early impressions, I don't know if I could necessarily say that this one was a true blueberry bomb. I don't know if I could justify the level 5 berry for this one, even though it was one of the most defining characteristics. At the time, it was a little bit more faint, so level 4 seems really good for this one. Stone fruit, level 4. Yes, it's on the lower side of level 4, but when I was able to get this coffee right, it had an added peachy quality to the cup, which was absolutely wonderful. But given that there was a lot of darkness within this, I could also see some darker side of the stone fruits as well, so maybe some plums as well to kind of complement that darker berry aspect. Chocolate, level 4. Yes, if anything, I do have to say that this was the most robust and defining characteristic for the entirety of this coffee, because the blueberry waned in and out, but the chocolate was ever present and consistent even from the first cup, so definitely a very dominant factor within this one. Then we have the body, level 3. Yes, no part of that will come as a surprise to anybody, as it was brewed with a V60 and it was a natural processed coffee, always going to be pretty much there at that level 3 mark. The last thing worth discussing is the cleanliness, level 3. Yes, and even with this one being on the cleaner side of natural processed coffees, I feel like a couple of things, slight bit of fermentiness, slight bit of graininess, definitely marred the overall clarity to this one. So for that reason, it did have to stay at that level 3 mark. And once again, there was a fair bit of a longer lasting finish. I don't think that that necessarily helped, coupled with the more robust chocolate aspects in this one. I was really hoping to see the clarity reach a level 4, as my memory serves me that coffees around that time were just starting to become a little bit more heavy and fermenty, but I was really hoping that this would have been one of those that maintained a great level of clarity for a natural processed coffee. But for the most part, I think that's a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. This one was just good. I think I went into it with some really high expectations given the endorsement I had heard about this coffee going into it. And I, once again, don't think that it helps that I've had some really nice natural processed Ethiopian coffees this year. I'm still thinking about that Karamo I had from Father's, which was one of the most impressive natural processed Ethiopian coffees I've had in years. So this one right here, even though it's maybe on the better side of the natural processed Ethiopian coffees I've had in the last couple of months, couple of years, it still doesn't necessarily stack up to that coffee that I was just so impressed by. But that's just kind of the way natural processed Ethiopian coffees are. You have really high expectations and standards for them, and very few actually meet those high expectations and standards. So this one, while it was good, it wasn't necessarily anything that I was overly impressed by. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, well, truth be told, anybody that's never tried one of Passenger's Freezer Friday coffees, I suggest you try them, because I think that it's really fun to kind of travel back in time and try something from the past. But this one specifically, if I'm directing it towards somebody, I would say that you're much more chocolate and berry forward natural processed Ethiopian coffees, because this one had both of those things in significant abundance, while at the same time not being too overbearing or too harsh, as it did offer some nice clarity from time to time as well. A little bit of depth and complexity, some stronger floral aspects to it, a fair bit of citrus, and most notably that wonderful stone fruit when you are able to obtain it. Does give it a little bit more well-rounded of an experience for a natural processed coffee. For the most part, I think I'm going to leave this review at that. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Bookisa natural processed Ethiopia from Passenger Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.